All right, take us from that extraordinary experience to how you got involved in politics.
Well, I grew up a lot going between Westchester and the Bronx. And so you start to kind of see politics emerge and how it starts to play a role in your life as you become a teenager, and then for me in college. And I moved back to the Bronx after I graduated college. My parents did everything they could. I went to public school. I graduated. I went to Boston University, graduated BU, and I decided that I wanted to go back to the Bronx and organize around early childhood education, because I felt that I didn't know what I wanted to do. This was right after, post-recession. This was around 2011. And I felt incensed about the extension of the Bush tax cuts during the Obama presidency. It was actually very radicalizing and shocking to me when I saw that when I was in college. It was that. I was like, how could we reward the people who did this and abandon the millions of people who've been victimized by this massive economic crime? It was shocking to me. And I moved back to the Bronx, and I was also felt very cynical about the politics in the Bronx. This was a time when, this is also where I saw a lot of the time of the limits of just a very superficial kind of racial identity politics, where we were electing, sure, lots of local politicians who were Latino and Black and just like a great racial diversity, but they still ascribed to the same corruption and the same just like pay for play politics that every other generation and what we had seen for a very long time. This level of corruption.
Just the color of the skin was a little different.
Yeah, exactly. And it supercharged that kind of cynicism. Right. And not only that, but a lot of them were getting arrested for it. They were getting caught. And it just became this thing of like, and it wasn't just me. I think there was just this community sense of like, this is not worth a. And so I was actually very much opposed to any idea of getting involved in electoral politics. Besides, I would vote, but outside of that, I felt that politics is just a place for wealthy people and connected people and corrupt people. And I am neither one of those things. And I even if I wanted to lie, I'm not a good liar. I just felt that it wasn't for me. I felt much more satisfied going into more direct, organizing families, working with families. I worked with the National Hispanic Institute. I worked with young people around how we can organize and improve our schools and improve our education. But then at that time also, when I was in college, my father had gotten sick. He passed away. And so my mom became a single mom, and we were on the brink of foreclosure ourselves, as a result of both the financial crisis and a personal financial crisis with the healthcare costs of my dad going through chemotherapy and everything like that. And so I quit my job, and because I had to help provide for myself and my family. And working restaurants at that time, you make cash, you bring home cash every day. You can have more control over what you bring home as opposed to just a salary job. Like you can pick up extra shifts, you can do all these other things. And that's what I did. And
what, tending bars and
yeah, I waitressed, I tended bar, I that's what I did. Not for a summer, but for 4 to 5 years of my life.
Wow.
And it's actually there. and my experience doing that and my family's experience that led me to that, that was the most important formative political experience of my life.
All right, and jump to a decision to run for the U.S. Congress against all the odds.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, spending all of that time working in restaurants, I felt like it was really a crucible of so many different political issues. Despite the ACA being passed, neither me nor anyone I worked with had health care because it was too expensive. Right. Most of the people that were preparing food for other people to eat were undocumented. The food costs were a result of, you know, these big ag oligopolies and how all those costs get passed on to little people. There's just on and on and on and on. The tipped minimum wage, you know, I would get my check once a week, my paycheck, and I would peel back the paper and unfold it, and I would see the check having 50 cents in it every week. Because you have to report your tips and they take, I mean, just living life in America is radicalizing as a working class American. And so after years of that, well, I think first of all, in 2016, you ran, and it was, I don't think from the shirts and the dirty sneakers that you have as a kid to, you know, opening that check and seeing 50 cents in it, we normalize this to ourselves. We accept it. And I think really deep down, the unconscious rationale that we give ourselves to accept this is what I deserve. Like this, or this is my lot. This is what I get, right? And when you ran in 2016, and we talked, and the way, it wasn't that you talked about healthcare, it was the way you talked about healthcare. It was the first time that I heard an elected leader say, everybody deserves healthcare in this country by the fact that they are born a human being. That it is an essential right of our dignity and existence, especially living in the wealthiest nation in the history of this world. And it broke my brain a little bit, seeing that on a television. And I was literally wiping a glass from behind a bar, and I didn't even realize that I didn't think I deserved healthcare until I heard someone say that I did. And then hearing that, I was like, why don't we have these things? This is right. We are living in an absurdity. Getting a 60-cent paycheck makes no sense. And it was very radicalizing for me. And you know, not only that, and I'm not saying this just to blow smoke at you, Bernie.
Go ahead, you're doing great.
But also, when you were the first presidential candidate to come to the Bronx since Bobby Kennedy in 1968.
And you know what? You may not know this. We were told not to go. There had been a murder in the area within the week. And the cops said, look, you know, it's not a good idea. There could be disturbances and everything else. It was a wonderful event.
It was, and I volunteered.
I didn't know that.
I volunteered.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We helped set it up. We helped, you know, we had like a, you know, the campaign set up like an office, an organizing office, and I was there 5 a.m. We're hanging door hangers on people's doors before they went to work.
10,000 people or something?
And and there was overflow, and it was so important because prior to that, there were only, you were the first since Bobby Kennedy as a candidate, but the only other in between that time was Ronald Reagan, who came to the South Bronx and and compared it to Dresden and left, to post-World War II Dresden and left. And you're going there really, like, it was shocking because nobody cares about us. We're a deep blue community in a deep blue city, in a deep blue state. There is no electoral incentive to care about us. And you went there. And we're a borough that doesn't have the highest vote turnout either because of the cynicism, because of this internalized apathy. And I was like, holy we're doing it. We're making ourselves matter. We're making ourselves matter. And that was such a fantastic day in St. Mary's Park. And I was one of the volunteers there. We helped advance and set up the event. And then I got to be part of the crowd. And it really meant something to me. And after that race, I dove back into organizing. I got involved with Black Lives Matter. I went to Standing Rock in order to fight the Keystone XL pipeline. And it was after those experiences that I had kind of felt, for me, I think that my family, my background, the way that I'm raised, and also what has informed my politics, even intellectually, is very much the spiritual undercurrent of a left politics, especially in America, liberation theology, the civil rights movement.
Was your family Catholic?
My family, well, my father's Catholic, I was raised Catholic, and my mother's side of the family in Puerto Rico is more Pentecostal. And so I had felt at that point that I felt ready to just devote myself in a much fuller sense in my life to a greater struggle for justice. And I didn't know what that meant. And then then people started calling attention to our local congressman, who was a party boss. I remember looking him up, and my family's lived in the Bronx for over way longer than 30 years, but like since I was born, but my dad too, since he was born. And I remember looking up this guy and I was like, I've never seen this man in my life. Like not once ever. I was like, who is this? And I kind of thought, if I haven't seen him and if I don't know who he is, then I know that no one else knows who he is.
And you're talking about Joe Crowley, who was an up-and-coming leader in the Democratic establishment here in Washington.
Yeah. And I started to dig into what the deal was here. Because how does a person that is just completely unknown become the congressman? And I saw and I started to follow the money of what was going on. And even though he was not very well known in the community, he was extremely well known and extremely powerful among the New York City political elite. He was not only the heir apparent to the speakership in that U.S. House of Representatives, he was also the chairman of the Queens County Democratic Party, which was arguably the strongest political machine in all of New York City. And so he not only had national politics, but he built that path to national politics by really being a powerful player in the New York City real estate.
And how old were you at this time?
At this time, when I was looking at this, I was probably like 26 or 27.
So you decided to take on a guy who was going to become the Speaker of the House and the leader of the Queens Democratic Party, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
And I think the reason for it was twofold. No one else would.
Was quite as crazy as you are?
Yeah, no one else would do it. It was clear that anybody who wanted any future in politics would never do this. And I wasn't particularly attached to a future in politics. And we hadn't had a primary election in 14 years because this machine would intimidate, bully people out, sue them off the ballot. And it became really apparent that the only kind of person that would run would be a complete and total long shot with no chance. So I said, my goal was, if we at least had a choice, if we at least forced the first primary election in 14 years in this community, then that will have been a service. Like, let's just see if we can get on the ballot.
It's a funny story. So you got on the ballot.
So
and what happened?
We got on the ballot. Yeah. And guess what? This is important because a lot of people like to tell revisionist history about it, and I understand. There's a lot of people that played a role in that victory, but getting on the ballot, I was totally alone with just the few scrappy people in the neighborhood that were crazy enough to believe that this was worthwhile. We weren't endorsed by almost anybody. And not only that, but I mean, truly, the people who were collecting signatures in that time were just people in the neighborhood. And I had no money, like none at all. I had a paper grocery bag with a clipboard and, stuff that I'd keep behind the bar. I'd work my shift. I'd take my bag with my clipboard out, and then I'd go out across the Bronx and Queens. It was lunacy. It was lunacy. But there were enough people that we were able to organize at that point that we collected the signatures to get on the ballot. And not only that, we collected about 6 or 7 times that, so that they couldn't sue us off. They couldn't throw us off. And after I got on the ballot, and we met our first goal, which was to force the first primary election in 14 years, people started paying more attention to it. And I kept messaging. I think really at the end of the day, the core goal and the core message of our campaign was that we deserve better. It was to try to spread the gospel on this, which is that we don't have to justify being able to afford to live. We shouldn't have to justify or need some convoluted argument as to why people should be paid enough.
All right, so you started the campaign, people thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
No chance at all to win.
Yeah.
And on election day, what happened?
So on election day, I never allowed myself to even imagine myself winning because it felt way too crazy. But I also never imagined myself losing either. I just imagined myself getting to 8:59 p.m. the minute before the polls close, and then just what happens, happens. But that day, earlier that day, we were canvassing, going around. I remember we were going around to the polls, making sure everything's okay. And that day I was walking down the street, and this family, was driving down the street, and there were all these kids inside, and I was walking down the street, and this local family, they look out the window and they honk and they go, "Alexandria, we just voted for you." And that's when I was like, wait, we could win this thing. We could win this thing. And so the polls close, 8:59 p.m. And I get in the car, and my friends are driving the car, and my mom's in there with me, and I'm so nervous. And my mom's cell phone starts going off, and it's ping, 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 but I didn't know what the results were. And I was like, "Mom, can you just silence your phone for a second?" I was like so nervous. And we get out of the car, and I was so nervous, we didn't even have a location for a watch party. My friend just like, "Let's just meet at the billiards hall." And we go to the billiards hall, and we ask them to put it up on the screen. And we go up, and not only am I winning, but we were up like 10 points.
All right, there's a lot.
Nothing.
A lot from this to be learned from what Alexandria just said. And that is, in many ways, what the establishment is about is a lot of money, people talking to each other. But if you can organize at the grassroots level, and she's outspent 100 to 1 or something, it ain't much there. I mean, there really isn't. They have wealth, they have power, but there aren't many of them. And bottom line is, and I saw that in my presidential campaign, took on Hillary, oh my God, the entire Democratic establishment, why are you even running? Turns out there's just not many of them.
Yeah.
And they are very far removed in many ways from the realities of working people's lives. So, I mean, what Alexandria's story is about is not only an extraordinary story about, what she has accomplished, but I think it's a lesson for everybody. And sometimes we become a little bit pessimistic about the state of the world and where we are politically. But when you have people willing to take on big money, willing to do grassroots organizing, who come from, the working class themselves, we can accomplish great things.
In other AOC news, in relation to her filing articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito, AOC said the following: "Given the court's demonstrated inability to preserve its own legitimate conduct, it is incumbent upon Congress to contain the threat this poses to our democracy and the hundreds of millions of Americans harmed by the crisis of corruption unfurling within the court. Congress has a legal, moral, and democratic obligation to impeach."